Mayor Sladek, if possible, if you turn your phone horizontally, it'll give us a better image of you, an even better image, of course.
I'm trying to get my computer to do it, but for some reason it will not connect to the internet. I'm at City Hall for the first time ever for this meeting, and it's a little slow with the internet connection.
Understood. Right. I'm going to go ahead and get started in just another minute. We have a few others joining us. Mr. Chairman, we are now recording the meeting and streaming live to YouTube. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this virtual Metro Plan Orlando MAC meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Keith Trace, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We also have a great team of folks working to ensure this meeting runs smoothly. Today's meeting was advertised on Metro Plan Orlando's website and social media, as well as through targeted marketing emails. Florida Sunshine Law requires a quorum to be physically present in a room for a government meeting. Governor DeSantis suspended this requirement in an executive order allowing governing boards to conduct business using virtual meetings. That order expired October 31st, so this meeting is being held in a workshop format. Now it's time for the Pledge of Allegiance. Today, I'll ask one of our new board members, Winter Springs member Kevin McCann, to lead the pledge. If everyone could please remain on mute.
Great. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce myself as the new MAC chair. Keith Trace, I've been on for about a year now. At today's meeting, we'll keep our microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak, and we'll use the raise hands feature to participate in discussion. There are 2 public comment points in this meeting. Members of the public who want to speak will use the raise hands feature on the Zoom screen. If they're attending by phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand, and the request will be recognized. When you're called, your microphone will be temporarily unmuted by staff, and we'll ask you to state your name and contact information for the record. We've also accepted comments by email and phone messages before the meeting. The guidelines for public comments are posted at metroplanorlando.org/virtual meetings. We want this and all future online meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact Metro Plan Orlando staff. I now would like to recognize 5 new MAC members and have them introduce themselves to the group. And I believe 4 are with us this morning. Up first is Castleberry Mayor David Henson.
Hi,
Hey.
Dave Henson, new mayor of Castleberry.
Congratulations and welcome aboard. Up next is Winter Park Mayor Phil Anderson.
Yes, good morning. This is Phil Anderson, and I was just sworn in about 6 weeks ago. I've been a prior city commissioner from 2008 to 2011, and excited to be here. I'm a civil engineer by training, but a finance guy by experience.
Uh-oh, I'm a civil engineer too. That's dangerous. Welcome aboard. Now we have Winter Springs Council Member Kevin McCann.
Good afternoon, or good morning, excuse me. Yeah, my name is Kevin McCann, and actually I was sworn in as mayor just last week.
Oh, I thought you said you weren't mayor anymore. Oh,
I know that's Charles Lacey is no longer the mayor. He has resigned.
All right, welcome aboard. And then, Longwood Mayor Richard Drummond.
Hello, and like I stated, I am no longer mayor. We
I got it mixed up.
elected Brian Sackett as mayor on Monday. So I will continue as a commissioner.
Perfect. All right, and then we also have City of Oakland Commissioner Sal Ramos. I don't believe he is on.
He's not with us this morning, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. And then at this time, I would like to recognize Mr. Alex Trogger, Metro Plano Orlando staff for the agenda review.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Trace, and good morning, members, and all those who are attending with us online. My name is Alex Trogger. I'm your new Municipal Advisory Committee liaison. I met a few of you at the orientation, and I've been introduced at your last meeting. New to this liaison role with the Municipal Advisory Committee, but I've been with Metro Plan Orlando for almost 10 years now. So very familiar with our processes and look forward to this new role and helping you engage in our planning process as Municipal Advisory Committee members. So thank you all, for working with us to conduct these virtual meetings. And we do appreciate your patience and understanding. If possible, if you can have those your cameras turned on, during the duration of the meeting, that's super helpful as we engage virtually. But based on the direction from our board at their December meeting, their December 2020 meeting, this meeting and all of our other advisory committee meetings will be held virtually, which action items will actually be reviewed and discussed, but no formal action will be taken. So our quorum, even though we have one today, will not be required. And that board resolution is actually through June 30th, which we'll talk a little more about later in the meeting. As the chairman mentioned, we'll use our raise hands feature to recognize committee members during the meeting and to call on members of the public during the comment period. If you have joined us on the phone without the video screen, again, you can use *6 to mute and unmute your line. And please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so the meeting host, if you wish to be recognized. You also see that there's a chat feature, and most of you are becoming very familiar with this in the toolbar. And this communicates with all panelists in the meeting, which includes committee members, staff, and other presenters. Please only use this chat feature if you're having technical issues or need assistance, because a full record of those chat comments are included in the public record of this meeting. Before I move on, I want to tell you a little bit about one of our current projects, our ongoing projects, which is our 2021 Regional Transportation Survey, which will be active from May 3rd. So we launched a little earlier this week up until the 23rd. It's about a 10-minute survey and covers all types of transportation. And the results will help us really plan for the future better. As you may know, we periodically conduct this market research, and we'd really like your help taking the survey, as well as distributing our survey link in your personal and professional networks. I'll be following up with you following this meeting with an email along with a flyer, so you can have that information and disseminate it accordingly. Finally, I want to add my welcome to all those new MAC members. We did have a great orientation session last month. And my invitation still stands to others interested in an orientation or even a refresher to some of our longstanding members. And we can do that, of course, at your convenience. Mr. Chair, that does complete my announcements for this morning. We have no changes to the printed agenda. And now we'd like to take attendance. So I'll ask Ms. Kathy Goldfarb to call the roll.
I'll ask all committee members to please go ahead and unmute yourselves now for the roll call, and can go on mute again after your name is called. Please make sure your video is on if possible so we can confirm it's you. You'll find the unmute and video buttons on your Zoom screen. Please say here or present when your name is called. Anderson?
Here.
Anselmo?
Here.
Cole? Dowlis?
Here.
Drummond?
Here.
Berstner?
Here.
Foraker?
Here.
Henson,
Here.
McCann,
Here.
Sladak,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Trace.
Here.
That concludes the roll call. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will now hear public comments that are on what we normally call action items, but in this format, our items are for review and only discussion. Do we have any people who want to speak to any of these items? If so, please use the raise your hands function on your screen or press *9 on your phone keypad. When we call your name, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says the host wants to unmute you. Please accept, and the prompter will activate your microphone. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record, and please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. Are there any participants that have comments at this time? Alex, did you have anyone?
We did not. No, Mr. Chair, we do not have any written comments or seeing any coming.
Okay, no raised hand and no written comments. We will move to agency reports, and we'll hear from our agency partners. FDOT and the Florida's Turnpike are making presentations later on the agenda. So if you would rather defer your comments until then, that is perfectly fine. Up first is Ms. Henson with DOT.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I do not have any comments to share this morning. We do have reports that will be included with other agenda items, so I would just direct the committee's attention to those areas.
Right, and did anyone have any questions? I see Mayor Dallas's microphone is turned on.
Oh, no.
No questions? Okay. All right, thank you, Ms. Henson. For Florida's Turnpike, Mr. Sayosi.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Siasi Finer. I'm with the Turnpike. I have one quick update. So next month, there will be a public kickoff meeting for project 446581-1, which is the PD&E for the Poinciana Parkway extension from County Road 532 to north of the I-4 State Road 429 interchange. And there will be two sessions that people can register for. A virtual session on June 22nd that will begin at 5:30, and an in-person session that will be on June 24th, and that will begin also at 5:30 p.m. With the in-person venue being at the Advent Health Nicholson Center, located at 404 Celebration Place in Celebration, Florida. So more details, including registration web pages, will become available as the meeting dates approach, and that will be shared to the MPO for all your information. And that is under my report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fine. Does anyone have any questions for FDOT or for the Turnpike? All right, thank you. And up next is Miss Trish Witten with Links.
Hi, just a short general update on our ridership. Our ridership has been hovering around 50% since September, and we're starting to see a slight increase, creeping up towards about 60% of pre-COVID ridership on the fixed route system. And we also implemented some minor service changes April 25th. And then we also just wanted to mention that we were notified by the American Public Transportation Association that they've made the decision to move their annual conference and expo to the Orlando Convention Center in November. So this is this is their premier event. It brings a lot of agencies and vendors to the area to share ideas. So just wanted to briefly mention those things. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Witten? All
No
right.
hands are raised, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Up next, we have two items for review and discussions today. Up first is the review of our March 24th, 2021 meeting minutes on tab 1. in your agenda packets. I hope you all had a chance to review them. Are there any corrections or revisions that need to be brought to staff's attention? All right, hearing none. As a reminder, these will be brought back for formal approval in a future in-person meeting. Our next item is the FDOT amendment to the 2020-2021 through 24-25 TIP found in tab 2 of your agendas. Mr. Keith Casey from MetroPlan Orlando will present this information. If you could, please hold all questions until Mr. Casey is finished with the presentation. Mr. Casey?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Keith Caskey. I'm the project manager for the TIP. And for those of you that are new on the committee, the TIP is one of the main documents that we do as an MPO, and it includes all the transportation projects that are funded over the next 5 years. And I'll be doing a preview of the new TIP at next month's meeting, and we'll go into more details at that time. But the TIP is amended on a regular basis. And this morning we have 3 projects included in the amendment request from FDOT. These include Sunrail Phase 2 North, and that's in Volusia County, which is outside of our region. But FDOT has requested us to include that in our TIP since that is a district-wide project. And then there's a 4-laning project on Neptune Road in Osceola County. And that project is mostly funded with Osceola County local funds, but they are receiving about $500,000 in federal SU funds for right-of-way, and that will make this project eligible to receive additional federal funding in the future. And then finally, we have a railroad crossing project on Hester Avenue near Sanford. And you all have the information on these in your agenda packets. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
All right, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Caskey, for your update. All right, we have 3 presentations today. If you would please use the raise hands function to be recognized if you would like to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation to indicate you want to ask a question, but we will hold all questions until the presentation ends. If you're having audio issues, please type your questions into the chat box and the moderator will relay those questions. Up first, we have a board emphasis areas presentation from Mr. Nick Lepp of MetroPlan Orlando staff.
Good morning. Apologize, my camera took a little bit to get going this morning. So I'm going to present to you board emphasis areas. This will be new to the MAC committee. This is something that's been presented to the board in years past. And next slide, please. And I'll go over why. So our previous 2040 long range plan had some goals and objectives, but during the prioritization process, we added emphasis areas for our governing board. This was emphasis that the board can put on these kind of targets as we went through the prioritization process. Their emphasis areas were trail connectivity, engaging the younger population, complete streets, safety, and Sunrail connectivity. And these are emphasis areas that we've applied to the prioritization over the last 4 years as we've developed those project priorities. Next slide, please. And over the years, we've been wanting to track to see how we've been doing with these emphasis areas in terms of programming our MetroPlan Orlando TMA funds. And these are the funds, as we described to you during our prioritization process, that allocate funding to complete streets, TSMO projects, sidewalks and trails, and transit. So we wanted to see how we were doing in meeting the emphasis areas each year going forward. So when we first started, about 52% of those funds were going towards those emphasis areas. And then over the years, we kept continuing to increase that as we prioritized and programmed projects for that emphasis, up to about 93% going towards those 5 areas. Next slide, please. As we developed the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we started seeing and incorporating those emphasis areas into our goals and objectives for the overall plan, which included health and environment, safety and security, reliability and performance, access and connectivity, and investment in the economy. Next slide, please. So we wanted to see where these emphasis areas also matched up with our goals, finding that we have some good coverage within our goals and objectives that were adopted for the 2045. With those emphasis areas, we were looking to carry those into the actual goals themselves. And now looking at a process where we can use this annually to help weight those goal areas for that prioritization. And I will get into that in a minute and actually have more of an interactive exercise for you this morning where you're going to be able to participate and rank these goals yourself. Next slide, please. So within each goal area, there are performance measures. Back in 2018, we had to adopt a performance-based planning prioritization process. And within that, there are each of these measures that are used to help determine which projects are prioritized to go forward for federal funding. So within each goal, there will be the certain number of measures. And what we're looking to do is use this annually to help weight kind of that goal area to determine which performance measures should have a little bit more emphasis in our prioritization process. So for example, if we weighted safety and security higher, the crash rate details, along with fatal and serious, number of pedestrians, and evacuation route designations would have more of an emphasis in the priority metrics and resulting in higher prioritization in this next round if we were doing that. So we are looking to get some advice from all of our boards and committees on where that weighting should apply in this next year for prioritization. Next slide, please. During the process of the MTP, we also did some surveying to see how people felt about each one of these goal areas. And what we found is that everybody weighted them pretty equally during the plan itself. So as we prioritize those projects to be ultimately cost feasible, they all had an equal weighting, all equaling one point per se. Next slide, please. We also did a survey asking them how they felt about it kind of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And that's where we noticed some of the shifts in people's sentiment on these goals and where the most important goals were. Pre-pandemic, it was access and connectivity as well as investment economy. Post-pandemic, those started shifting. You started seeing more emphasis on investment economy and health in the environment. So this is something that triggered us to start looking at maybe we should start doing this annually through our process in prioritization and offering this as a weighting for our committees and board that we can adjust as we go forward. And we're going to have Lisa's going to drop a survey within the chat where we're going to ask you guys, you can take out your phones or use your computers. And this will be an opportunity to weight those goal areas. And Lisa, if you can also go to the next slide, please. I will leave those performance measures up so you can look at with each goal area which performance measures you actually have more emphasis in. And we want to rank the highest to the lowest. So at the top, put what your most emphasized goal area would be down to the lowest. It doesn't mean that we will not rank those goal areas that are lower. It just means they may get lower weight. We've asked also the Technical Advisory Committee, the TISMO Committee, and we're asking you to rank these. We'll also bring these to the board next week and ask them to rank, and we'll also present all of these rankings. Unfortunately, we don't have this as a live survey today, but we will be happy to share the results with you towards the beginning of next week as we compile them all. So with that, I will leave you a few minutes to help rank your goal areas, but I'll offer this time also to answer any questions you may have.
And members, again, Lisa did provide a survey link in your chat, in the chat box. So if you want to click that and rank those 5 goal areas, most important to least. And as Nick said, we'll report those back next week.
All right. Seeing no questions, appreciate your time and look forward to see those results.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Up next, we have a presentation on pedestrian safety by Mr. Wilson of MetroPlan Orlando staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. And if I could get screen control, please. Some of you may have been aware that just before our last board meeting, we had the National Dangerous by Design report come out. This comes out every couple of years generally, and ranks metro areas by the rate of pedestrian fatalities that we have. And because it happened just before the board meeting, we didn't really have time to respond to it. So that's what we're doing now. So this presentation today is going to look into some of the questions that came up about the whole process, the pedestrian danger index that the report uses, and look at how, if we change some elements of that index, how does that affect our scoring? For those of you who may not have noted it, we ranked at the top of the list, which is not a good place to be. It means we have the highest danger index. So how do we bring that down? And through that, I want to talk about some of the scenarios of if we change some of those factors, talk about some of the new practices and approaches, particularly what FDOT is doing with its new program of the Safe System approach. Give you a little bit of background, simple background on the crossing law for when pedestrians are permitted to cross the road, and then spend a good bit of time talking about how these crashes happen and what the most important factors are. Let's see if we get, there we go. All right. So the pedestrian danger index is fairly simple. It starts off with the number of pedestrian fatalities, and they generally use a 10-year period when they're calculating this. And then that's normalized by the population. So you get a number of fatalities per 100,000 population. And then that number is in turn divided by the percentage of people who are walking to work. And walking to work is the only national consistent measure of actual pedestrian exposure that's available. One thing to note as well with the data with the pedestrian danger index is that they're including the Lake County area as part of our metro area. So in the numbers going forward in this presentation, we'll just be looking at what our pedestrian danger index would be just for our metro area. We're calculating it based on our own numbers and not including Lake County data. One of the questions that we often get is, well, what kind of impact does our big visitor population have? Obviously, we're one of the biggest tourism locations in the country, if not the world. And we have roughly 200,000, before COVID, we had roughly 200,000 visitors here on any given day. And if we applied that to the pedestrian danger index, we'd see about a 9% drop in that score. You can see they're going from 284 to 259. But it's more than just the number of pedestrians and people in the area, but we also want to look at, are these visitors involved in crashes? And when we did a more detailed look at that for 2012 and 13, we had a little more detailed data on that. And you can see here that only 4% of our pedestrian fatalities involved people who lived outside of Florida, none of which involved people from outside the country. And 80% nearly of them lived within the Orlando metro area. So most of the people who are getting into pedestrian crashes are familiar with our traffic laws, familiar with how our road system works. If we looked at the number of people who are walking to work, going back over the prior decade, you can see the average of the first 3 years of 2011 through 13, we had about 1.1% walking to work. And that did increase toward the end of the decade to 1.7, which is about a 20% increase. But at the same time, we still had an increase in the pedestrian danger index of 15%. Now, if we had managed to increase walking to work by doubling it from 1.1 to 2.2, we would have seen a reduction in the pedestrian danger index. But of course, making that kind of increase is really difficult. We're a very suburban type of development pattern. Most of the walking increase that we have seen has been more in the downtown area. But really, it's when we get to actually reducing the fatalities that we see the biggest impact. If we took that same 20% number and applied it to decreasing fatalities rather than increasing walking, we would see a 42% drop in our pedestrian danger index. And so that's really where we need to keep our focus. The new Florida Highway Safety Plan has just come out for this year, and they're introducing a new concept, which they call the safe system approach, which actually comes from the federal level. And a key aspect of this is that we have to acknowledge that human beings make mistakes, and that particularly if that human being is outside of a motor vehicle, they are vulnerable to serious injury. So how do we design our system to accept that these mistakes are going to happen, but ensure that these mistakes don't result in serious harm? Well, in order to do that, we've got to understand what the key factors are that lead to pedestrian crashes. The mistake generally is failure to yield, either on the part of the pedestrian or the motorist. Darkness, of course, is a very important factor. Distraction is becoming an increasingly greater factor. And most of all is speed. We know that with a higher impact speed, there's a much greater potential for serious injury and fatality. But before I get into that, I want to get into the, addressing that issue of yielding is, well, when are pedestrians required to yield, when are motorists required to yield, and where are pedestrians permitted to cross? Between intersections, crossing mid-block, pedestrians are generally permitted to cross, provided that they yield to traffic on the roadway. So this pedestrian who's crossing between intersections would yield to any traffic. The reason they're allowed to cross is because the pedestrian is not between adjacent signalized intersections. You see the intersection there highlighted in red does not have a traffic signal, and the one on the left does. It's also important to understand what a crosswalk is. We tend to think of them as markings on the road, but the actual definition of a crosswalk is the lateral lines of a sidewalk crossing the roadway at the intersection. So you can see highlighted in green some unmarked crosswalks. And the law is silent really as to whether how yielding happens at such crosswalks, whether it's marked or not. The yield law applies the same. Now, between adjacent signalized intersections, then pedestrians are prohibited from crossing mid-block unless there is a marked crosswalk at such a location. So getting back to this idea about humans making mistakes, we have 3 road users here who are preparing to cross the main line of the road. All 3 of them have to yield to that approaching red car. And so understanding that this pedestrian is permitted to cross the road, just as the driver of that blue van is permitted to exit the driveway, the violation and the mistake is not crossing the road or exiting the driveway. It is failing to yield. So if we had a problem with lots of people pulling out of driveways and being T-boned by approaching vehicles, we wouldn't say you can't exit the driveway. We would look into what are the other factors that are contributing to this? Do we have a line of sight issue? Do we have a speed problem, a lighting problem? Those things would be what we would address. So diving deeper into these fatality factors, darkness far and away is responsible not only for the lion's share of our crashes, but also the lion's share of our increase in crashes over the past decade. So you can see here that the severity of our nighttime crashes has gone up from 14 to 21%, and over a 70% increase overall of nighttime fatalities. While with daytime, we've only seen a a 7% increase. And keep in mind that we had a 14% increase in population over that same period. So we're really not seeing, we're actually seeing a decrease in daytime fatalities if you look at it from a population standpoint. And then if we look at the pedestrian failure to yield crash, here the numbers are even greater. We have an 84% increase in nighttime pedestrian failure to yield mid-block, while we actually had a decrease for daytime crashes. So what this tells us is that the problem is not that more pedestrians are crossing mid-block because they're or that they're doing a poorer job of it. The problem is very much a nighttime issue. But what was surprising to see is that it's not just nighttime. See if we can get that to come up. There we go. That more of them, sorry, let me back up here. Oops. Can we get, excuse me a second here, let me get us back. There we go. Sorry about that. So we had nearly 150% increase on streets with street lighting. So simply adding street lighting, which we've been doing a good deal of over the past decade, is not enough to keep our pedestrian fatality problem down. So while pedestrian failure to yield has actually declined as a percentage of all fatalities, it is becoming a more severe crash, more likely to result in a fatality. All right. Sorry, we're just not getting good screen advance this morning. There we go. So the other factor I wanted to talk about was distracted driving. Here we see a 120% almost increase in motorist failure to yield crashes, irrespective of lighting. A fair increase for nighttime as well. And note also at the bottom that smartphone ownership has gone from less than half to more than 3/4 over that same period. All right, alcohol and drugs, some interesting things happening here. While we've seen a decline in the number of alcohol or drug-related pedestrian deaths, that may be masked by an increase in hit and run crashes. When we look at failure to yield on the motorist part, this was a surprise considering that we've been doing so much work with the Best Foot Forward program, that motorist failure to yield has increased 20%, 25% overall, and even more so for daytime crashes. Now, this may be due to a number of things. One would be the distraction issue. Another may be that officers are doing a better job because of their participation in the Best Foot Forward program of correctly assigning right-of-way in these crashes. The real crux of this is to understand that we've got primarily a darkness and speed problem, that just over 80% of our pedestrian fatalities or pedestrian is crossing the road are happening at night, and another 82% are happening on roads posted at 40 to 50 miles per hour. One of the things I've noticed as I travel around the country is that I find myself on roads and thinking that, gee, if I were driving this very same road in Florida, it would be posted at a higher speed. So there's a few examples I want to show you, and I've been on these streets, or some of them anyway. So Lee Vista Boulevard, which is right here in Orlando, and you can see the dimensions, 26 feet from the median to the curb. And Oak Street in Bozeman, Montana, actually a couple feet wider, narrower overall because the median is narrower. But you can see that they're very comparable streets, and yet the Bozeman Street is posted 10 miles per hour slower than the Orlando Street. Another one from Montana compared to Florida, Apopka there on the top of the 62-foot wide 5-lane section. The one in Montana actually has a big wide paved shoulder, very likely for storing snow during the winter. And yet in spite of all that extra width, again, they're still posting the road at 35 miles per hour. And you can see very similar land use to the Apopka shot. And then lastly, a 6-lane road in Kissimmee, US 192. You can see 96 feet from curb to curb. And a road in Houston, which is actually an 8-lane road and about 10 feet wider. And you can see the same type of relationship of the sidewalk right behind the curb. Again, similar land use. And again, 10 miles per hour slower. So that 10 miles per hour makes a critical difference when we're talking about the interactions of motorists and pedestrians. It greatly reduces the potential for a crash overall, and certainly reduces the potential for a fatality. So what we need to understand is what's different about the way we post speeds, or are there differences that we're not seeing just looking at photographs like this that contribute to the lower operating speeds? That's something that we really have to have a better understanding on as we go forward. So it's this deadly trio of darkness and distraction and speed that is really contributing to our increase. There is also something happening, and this is a national trend, that there are fewer passenger cars being sold and more large trucks and SUVs being sold. And these vehicles, because they're taller, that higher height results in greater injury given the same impact speed. And I'm not going to get too much into countermeasures with this presentation, but I wanted to bring up one because it's related to these two key factors of darkness and nighttime, is that we do have a countermeasure for this that's in use down on Big Pine Key on US 1 in the Florida Keys, where there's a nighttime speed reduction from 45 to 35 miles per hour. And this is to protect the endangered key deer. So the key deer suffer from the same challenge that human pedestrians do, and that is they have a hard time judging the speed of approaching vehicles. The drivers of the vehicles have a hard time seeing the deer when they're moving at high speed. And so we slow the motorists down to give those deer a chance to get off the road and to give those drivers a chance to stop before they hit the deer. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Just one pedestrian fatality is too many, and we have a lot of work to do to bring that number down. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Wilson today? All right. See, if you do, please unmute yourself or raise your hand. All right, seeing none, we will move on to a presentation of a study of automated Lynx vehicles by Mr. Doug Jamieson of Lynx and Mr. Alan Danaher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Doug Jamieson. I am with the Lynx Innovation Department. Also on the call with me is Alan Danaher with WSP, who conducted the study for us. Next slide, please. During this study, Lynx worked with the City of Orlando and also Metro Plan Orlando to partner on an automated vehicle concept of operations study. This looks at the potential of putting automated vehicles or AVs into our existing or future transit services. One of the guiding principles in this study was to ensure that automated vehicles could meet the needs of passengers and also transit service, but not changing all those needs to meet the needs of the automated vehicle. Next slide, please. So during this study, we went ahead and developed the concept of operations and also a draft scope of services for a future deployment of automated vehicles. These documents give us details on the anticipated scope and vision for the long-term incorporation of automated vehicles at Lynx. It helps Lynx and any future vendors better understand how the automated vehicles would be required to operate to meet the needs of Lynx and also of our passengers. And it also helps Lynx and our local regional partners understand the physical and the data infrastructure that is currently available, along with any gaps that exist. This allows us, as we make future investments in some of the infrastructure, to consider automated vehicles, while also sharing with any future vendors some of the improvements they might have to do to operate their vehicles. Next slide, please. So during this study, we started out with a request for information back in the spring of 2018. We asked the vendor community to give us comments on their readiness to provide automated vehicle service for transit operations, the ability to accommodate different passenger needs, and also some of their future direction and plans. We then further developed the documents that you see around the perimeter on this graph. So we looked at the coordination between the different partners that would be involved, any policies that are out there, existing conditions, along with accessibility needs of the service so that we can serve all customers, any concerns or risks that are currently out there that would need to be addressed, how we fit into the regional plans for intelligent transportation systems. Also looked at what is the purpose for the deployment, some goals, objectives, how do we develop our workforce so that as we would transition to new technology, those skill sets are there and being developed, along with what is the infrastructure, any updates that are needed, and how would we choose a vehicle that meets the needs. And then we looked at some operating scenarios and the financial implications. We worked with the stakeholder group, as I mentioned, between Lynx, the City of Orlando, and Metro Plan, and then also did a bit of outreach to different committees and some of the public. Next slide, please. So during that outreach, we went ahead and asked for the public's opinion on opportunities when we're moving into this technology and also some of the barriers. These are some of the top responses. Automated vehicles are believed that they would give more flexible transit services, better mobility for people, especially those who cannot drive. They might have a lower environmental impact as they would most likely be electric vehicles. And also the automation would allow them to be driven very efficiently. And then less congestion as you have more and more responsive public transit to the customers. The barriers mostly have to do with what drivers currently provide. So the driver assistance getting in and out of a vehicle, the security that people would feel in a vehicle, especially if they got on without a transit presence and were on the vehicle alone or with a few other people. Wayfinding assistance. How do you know where the vehicle's going and which stop it is you need to get off at? Driver assistance with people that need securement on the vehicle or other assistance. And then it still seemed to be untested technology. It's mostly in demonstrations, but not in wide deployment. Next slide, please. During these surveys, 90% of the respondents believe that the existing limo service would be the best fit for the automated vehicles. And I'll cover that a little bit more in another slide here. But it was also then followed by about half of the respondents identifying the Disney Direct service, which are bus routes that serve communities and get those workers into Disney, along with our NeighborLink services that go ahead and provide zone-based I'm sorry for the background noise there, zone-based services in our neighborhoods. 60% thought that Access Link would not be a good fit for service, just due to the assistance that is required from drivers to help the customers during their travel. And then 70% responded that they felt that the overall use of automated vehicles in public transportation would be helpful to people with them. So positive responses. Next slide, please. During the study, we looked at various user types. So the typical user type is basically a customer that does not fit into one of the other user types. We also then looked at limited English proficiency. So people that English is not the first language or they're not fluent, how would they still interact with an automated vehicle? Customers that have small children or carry-on items, they might need extra time to board the vehicle to hold longer for them to get on and get set. We also looked at cognitive impairments, hearing impaired, visually impaired, and also older users. The concept here was to look at all users that are currently using the system and make sure that as we develop our requirements, it meets everybody's needs. We don't want anybody to be left behind by the technology or feel that it's perhaps not for them because it's not able for them to interact with it. Next slide, please. So we, in looking at the different options out there, settled on two options that made the most sense. The one on the left are small shuttle style vehicles. These are currently available in the market. They are still being developed, but they are in demonstrations in different transit agencies throughout the United States. There are some operational issues that we'd have to be careful with. How do you charge them and maintain them? Most of them have low speed, so they operate around the 15-mile-an-hour, 20-mile-an-hour range. That works good for the transit service, but it's not as optimal when you have to drive across town to get back to your maintenance facility. There's also their interaction with other vehicles, and they do have limited capacity. So replacing a full-size bus would require multiple vehicles to get the same level of service. On the right, we also looked at what if we took an existing bus and retrofitted it with automated vehicle technology. This is currently in the research phase with some of the bus manufacturers. So it's still a few years away before it comes to the point where you can just go out and procure these buses. There would be less operational issues because at the end of the day, it's a regular bus and you could then drive it manually back to the garage across town and not have the issues with the interaction with other traffic. And it would have lower life cycle costs. It's an existing vehicle that we are used to having and servicing. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned that when we talked in the surveys, most people had identified limo service as the most likely. These are our limo routes downtown. And the one that made the most sense is Limo Orange. It is in the upper right of that map. Orange is the original limo line, and it has exclusive lanes, so there's less interaction with other traffic. It does have transit signal priority, which lets it go through the intersections on its unique phase and lowering the conflicts with other traffic. And the links maintenance facilities are not that far away. So charging infrastructure and maintenance is relatively close. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the financial impact. The first items were on that previous slide on the left, the shuttle style vehicle that was smaller, and then the retrofitting the bus was on the right. We looked at the existing limo cost, and then if we outsourced a one-year pilot, how much would that likely cost to give us the total cost. The two that came in the least are putting either one shuttle style vehicle into the existing limo service or retrofitting one of the existing buses. The decision at the bottom was that if we can retrofit one of the buses, there's less operational impacts. You maintain the capacity plus the ability to get it to charging and maintenance. Next slide, please. The benefits that we saw from moving forward into a pilot demonstration is to allow customers to get on, touch the technology, get used to it, would allow us to test it and evaluate it against the capabilities that are required. It should also provide safety and efficiency as the automation begins to help the driver or even take over some of the functions. It could increase economic development opportunities if the automated vehicles can allow us to provide more frequency and longer service, and then lower the operating cost of the service. I did mention at the beginning of the presentation that the goal is to provide transit services with automated vehicles fitting into that goal, not changing the services simply to have automated vehicles. So it would make sense if the automated vehicles can provide the same or better level of service for all passengers at a competitive or better cost. Next slide, please. We also look in the future at expanding beyond the limo for a fuller demonstration. This would be out a little ways in the future, but we could do circulators, our NeighborLink zone-based service that operates in the communities, and possibly even some line haul services. Next slide, please. I won't go into great detail on this one, but we did look at the potential funding sources. So we looked at federal sources that might be able to help with the pilot, also partnership with the FDOT to do a pilot in the area, but also keeping open for any private investors who would like to come and bring one of their shuttles and do a demonstration in a partnership with us. So these are opportunities that we can keep eyes on and share with our funding partners as they may or may not become available. Next slide, please. So our study started with the request for information in 2018. We have now developed the requirements that would be required for the service before it could go into full service, which gets us ready to understand when we are ready to deploy. We would very much work with our funding partners to ensure that they agree this is the direction to move and that they are in support of the project. We would then identify funding, release a request for proposal to do a demonstration, and also make sure that the technology advancements are there to make sure that they meet all the needs. Next slide. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation, so I am open for questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? I've got a couple. So you guys are going with some of the downtown lines that don't have any fare collection. I think they're free. How are you guys handling that if you're moving on to other lines?
There are several options that we would look at with fare collection. One is proof of payment. So customers pay the fare and then you go ahead and check at different times to make sure that it has been paid by randomly checking customers. The other is, at least the current idea would be that we would still have a Lynx presence on the bus. So while it would be in an automated fashion, there would still be a driver or operator to assist customers with a lot of those items I mentioned that we cannot solve, like how do you secure people, how do you answer questions, how do you make sure that everything's safe. That person could then also check for.
Okay, and then what's the speed of the vehicle? Because I'm worried the presentation right before this was pedestrian safety, and there's a whole lot of pedestrians, jaywalking all over the place in downtown Orlando.
The shuttle style vehicles operate normally in a 10 to 15 mile an hour range. The limos operate in the same speed limit as downtown. So we would be at the same speed limit as the adjacent vehicles. If we went with the full size vehicle, you'd be limited to a 25 mile an hour range in the automated in the downtown core. If we move into other venues, we would match the speed of the roadways.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Jameson? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, there are several items under general information on tab 3 of your agenda packets, including a flyer about ongoing market research and a bicycle and pedestrian report from MetroPlan Orlando staff. So if you would, please review those items. And then our next MAC meeting will be June 3rd, 2021. So a quorum will not be required, but please mark your calendars for July 1st meeting. Oh, sorry, I do see a raised hand from Mayor Phil.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, I've just got one comment and one question. The comment is that, we're going through our American Recovery Act reimbursements from the federal government right now, and we're percolating away. And I just want to, I'm sure Bront Stevenson and Sarah Walter at our Planning and Transportation group are totally on top of it. But one of the things that we specifically highlighted is connectivity to the Orlando Urban Trail that was referenced on the April 15th memo. And I'm sure they've already reached out to the appropriate people to figure out what that connecting point is going to look like, but I wanted to mention that. And then the other question, and this is probably could have waited, but Alex, if I wanted to get copies of a few of these slides for our other commissioners and or our traffic advisory board, do I reach out to you, or what's the best way to get it?
Yeah, so actually, as part of our meeting record are our slides. So as part of a packet that we put together, if you need those sooner, we can package those up and send those to you later this week. But it is, part of our protocol to include the slides as part of our meeting record.
Great. And so do I reach out to you, Alex, for that?
Certainly, I'll make note of that, Mr. Mayor, and we'll send that over to you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please mark your calendars for the July 1st meeting will be held in person. Staff will provide more information before that meeting. The next Metro Plan Orlando board meeting will be May 12th and will be a hybrid meeting with some board members and staff and public in attendance, and then the remainder will be available to be on Zoom. All right, at this time, do any other committee members have any final comments? If you would, please use the raise hand function and unmute yourself. All right, Alex, do you see anyone? I don't think I do.
None, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. I was coming off mute, but we have no hands raised on the participant or attendee side.
All right. And then if any members of the public wish to make any comment, please use the raise hand function and you can be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad and we will unmute your mic. After you're recognized, please state your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 2 minutes. We'll give that a second. All right, Alex, do you see any?
None, Mr. Chair. I was just giving it one more second just in case, but we're seeing none.
All right. And were there any phone or written comments that were submitted before the meeting?
No comments were submitted prior to the meeting.
Well, perfect. If there is no further business of the MAC, we will stand adjourned. Thank you all for your time and see you all next month.
Thanks.